Welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys. That's Tunde Ogunlana. And welcome to a bonus call-out episode this week. We want to take a look at a good article came out in The Ringer this past week or a few days ago, looking at how the NBA has changed over 25 years in charts, which was very helpful to see in charts, these changes, where people are shooting, where the players are coming from, all those types of things. So Tunde, I don't want to spend a bunch of time on this, but just what stood out to you in this chart, on these charts that were put together. I believe it was Kirk Goldsberry who put this article together, and to illustrate how much the NBA has changed, especially you who played, college basketball, at least, 25 years ago, so you played the sport at a high level in this old paradigm.
Yeah, so it's interesting. A few things stuck out, which I know we'll get into, but really my overall feeling was it's interesting to think of it actually is a true evolution of a sport.
Yeah,
that's what kind of stuck out to me. Like, all right, it's interesting. I wouldn't say that the sport has changed species yet, but it's evolving. And that I found interesting, just that the sport has changed so much, but it's still the same sport. It's not like cricket becoming baseball, right? That is something really different.
That's excellent. It's like, so for example, with the shot diet, and we hear people complain about this, there's all these threes and the game has become, so repetitive. People are shooting from the same areas on the floor. Well, that's evolutionary because the reason that has happened is because people started charting, and the charts, we can see the charts here. People started charting the efficiency of shot locations, independent of the shooter. But it's like, okay, when you shoot a shot from the top of the key outside the 3-point line, how many points on average does that generate? Meaning, if you take 100 of those shots, how many points will you get? And it's like, okay, well, if you take a shot from the top of the key, if you shoot it 100 times, you'll end up with 110 points. And if you take a shot at the rim, if you do it 100 times, you'll end up with 120 points. And what was found basically is that shots right around the rim and shots outside of the 3-point line were the only ones that consistently over large sample size delivered higher than 1 point per shot, average, again. And so as a result, so people saw that, and that's like survival of the fittest, basically. And it's like, okay, well, we want to take all of our shots in these areas where over a large sample size, they will generate more points. And so all these people are trying to shoot shots at the rim. Shots at the rim are still the king. But it's hard to get to the rim. So when you bring the ball up the court, there's 5 guys between you and the rim. And so getting to the rim isn't easy. Getting to the 3-point line is easier. So, you'll see a lot of threes, and then you'll see the threat of threes trying to pull people away from the rim to open up the rim. And so that's like 100% evolutionary, and so, yeah, I think you used the correct word with that. Also, I wanted to throw at you the international piece, which I thought was very interesting. One of the things that was observed is the MVPs, the high end of the league. Now, there's more international players now than there ever have been, but where you really see it is where you see is at the high end, the international players now there's been a run, I think 7 years now, where a player who was born outside of the United States has won the MVP. So while there's still more American players, there's more international players than there were 25 years ago, but there's still way more American players in the league. But the top end, the top 5 players, the people that are competing for MVPs and so forth, that now has been dominated by internationals. Which, again, is not something in America we would have thought of, especially because we can still consider ourselves the best basketball, country. So what did you think about the international piece and how you had distribution of international players at the top?
Yeah, so I'm going to speak on that and get back to the evolution because my note I just wrote is these international players are kind of like migrant workers. I think we need to kick them out because they're taking the American job, right? You telling me these guys getting MVPs? This isn't merit based. This is, I want the administration version of DEI. I want to be able to give people that don't have merit.
No, Tunde, they're doing work that Americans don't want to do.
You sure about that? Because I think someone would like to go on a basketball court and make $50 million a year. I would.
I'm not sure.
And I'm not as good as those guys. So it's like the guy who became the national security thing, right? He had only 3 stars and not 4 stars. So why can't I do that?
Yeah.
You're telling me, okay. So
I'd say this. This is one of the areas, sports generally has been on the leading end of areas where merit is taken into account, because wins and losses are wins and losses, and you can have any kind of bigoted view you want.
I think you're wrong. I think they gave black people a chance in sports as a handout, and they're actually not better than anyone else. And I don't think they're really that tall and that fast. And I just think it's all a game. So you keep going with all that, sir. I'll stick to my thing. But nah, man. But on a serious note, here's the thing I was going to say about the evolution, and then I'll pass it back. Is what I found interesting was the impact is just like real evolution with nature, right? It may be some small factors of changes in the environment that create these long-term outputs in the species, right? That change it over time, or cause the change. And I feel like the small inputs were, maybe around a decade, 13 years ago, when a young man named Stephen Curry, who really was a dynamic and, really changed type of player, generational type of player, and his coach, I guess, Steve Kerr, that combination of this amazing player that could shoot the ball fearlessly with the way he did, and then a coach who developed a system around that, and then them getting players like Kevin Durant and Harden at the time,
and them running off
these young guys that were winning championships and also doing it in this style. And I think what I say about the evolution of it, that was basically the nail in the coffin for certain things that, to me, I really enjoyed as a player from back in the old days and a fan, and that were really part of basketball since its founding, like a post game. The ability of big men and centers and power forwards to actually have a lot of skill in their footwork and dominating in the post. Yeah. And that went away from basketball because of this evolution. And so one of the things, just to read on the stats, to me, James, the stats were amazing. In 2000, only 17% of the league's field goal attempts came from beyond the arc, 3-point range. In 2025, it was 42%. So then that leads to a staggering quote, 78% of the league's more than 116,000 total jumpers came from downtown, meaning 3-pointers, while 2-point jumpers reached a new low. They were only 12% in the last season, 2024-2025. So,
and that's looking at jump shots again, not layups, dunks, things like that.
That's what I'm saying. When we're talking just jump shots, 78% of all jump shots were threes. That, to me, as a guy that played in the 90s, early 2000s, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's actually a crazy stat. So that, like you're saying, is the evidence that the mid-range shot is gone. It's either a three or a layup.
But the reason it was intentional, it was because when they put out the spreadsheets and they saw how many buckets were being made on the post-ups versus now the 3-pointer gets an extra point, which some people say is kind of overpowering anyway, is that you get 50% more points. And then so it definitely killed the 20-foot jumper, because it's like, well, hold up, you take a step and a half back and it's worth an extra 50%. But even that the post game or the mid-range game, that those shots proved, unless it's Kevin Durant, unless it's a super elite player taking those shots, they proved less efficient. That's adaptation and advantage, and then it changes behavior, and then now it's going to go even further because generations are now coming up knowing this math, and so more players are learning to shoot threes at an earlier age. It would be somebody like Brook Lopez comes in the league as a post player and is an all-star post player. And then in order to stick around, he starts shooting threes because it's like, well, hey, my 3-point shots are more efficient than my 2-point shots, so other than at the rim. And so I'm going to start shooting threes. Now, somebody like Brook Lopez has been shooting threes since he's been in middle school. Conceivably, the efficiency might even go up even more. Now, we're not getting into whether this is good or not, but it's just interesting to see the adaptation and advantage. Last thing I wanted to touch on also, though, was the growth in franchise value, because that, to me, is also what stood out. The Lakers recently sell at a $10 billion valuation. Now, you go back 25 years, there weren't billion-dollar franchises, so to speak. This was, these were hundreds of millions of dollars, and it had been in that tens of millions and hundreds of millions range for a while. And so it has been, now the chart on this looks like almost, it looks like you're going up Mount Everest in terms of how the values have grown more steeply and steeply. And we've talked about growth in asset prices and, what the quantitative easing that happened after 2008 crisis. And then the amount of money that was printed again after the pandemic and how that inflated asset prices. Well, I think we see that for sure. That plus just the wealth inequality. But the things that rich people want to buy, the values are going straight up, because they have more and more money. So, that to me is another one of those things that really stands out in the NBA. And so now it's becoming a game, not that the guy who owns the local car dealership will buy, but actually some, capitalist from from Silicon Valley or, from Wall Street or whatever will come in, or what may be coming. And we've seen them. I think they can own up to 10% now. These sovereign wealth funds from the Middle East, they start buying it. It's a different kind of owner, that is coming into these things now, which will further change and evolve things. So anything before we close it up?
Yeah, so that's interesting, man, because I was going to say I noticed that too. I think the one thing I'll add is kind of like we talked about with evolution and the ecosystems. Remember, part of the reason that this took off, especially in the NBA, was the chaos theory. That's why evolution is a very interesting term here, because remember, it was a owner of the LA Clippers who was in his 80s, who was having an affair with a 29-year-old. And remember, all that stuff came out, and Steve Ballmer bought the Clippers for $2 billion. And that's what also helped this trajectory of this crazy money. And then
in a sense,
when the money goes
but remember
up,
that didn't get exceeded for another 3 years again, so like it was.
But it also did put a new psychological kind of floor that, hey, you can do this. And I think that's where the sovereign wealth funds or private equity started getting interested. And then once those guys start throwing money into stuff, to your point, it starts an exponential, kind of bid up. Yeah. More so than normal inflation in a sense.
For sure. Because you look at, you're talking $500,000, 2004, 2006, or under 2010, 2011. Then, the Clippers in 2014 hits $2 billion. 2017, the Rockets a little over $2 billion. 2019,
think about it,
still under $3 billion. This year we had 10. The Celtics go for 6.
Yeah.
The Lakers go for 10. So it's like even from 10 years ago,
the Clippers weren't that great. So the Rockets having a better storied franchise than the Clippers. Once they go to
Clippers
sell,
are in the LA market though. Also, so there's more factors that go into that. But a lot of it goes beyond just the market, the history, and everything like that. It's the amount of money these things are worth just keeps going up, because now even the lower end teams can command a much higher dollar. So, but I think we want to wrap from there. We appreciate everybody for joining us on this episode of Call Like I See It. Subscribe to the podcast, rate it, review it, tell us what you think, send it to a friend. Until next time, I'm James Keys.
I'm Tunde Ogunlana.
All right, we'll talk soon.